So in this video, we're going to animate the daylight system and do a light study. So what I'd like to do with a light study is change all the materials on the model to a slightly light gray color with a matte finish. So I'm going to go into the material editor. So I'm just going to click M and find an empty slot in the material editor. And this is going to be my override material. So I'm going to rename it override. And I'm going to create a material here that will replace the other materials in my scene. So I'm going to go matte finish for the template because I don't want it real glossy. And then under the color swatch, just going to change it so it's just got a slight gray color to it. If it's too white, it'll just be too bright. I'm just trying to create a nice contrast between the model and the shadows from the daylight system. Now you can hit F10 or click on the render scene icon here. And I'm going to go into the processing tab. And under processing, there's a material override section. You just click on enable. And notice it says material there, and then there's a box that says none. Just need to drag the material, that override material I created for the material editor. Just need to drag that over the box that says none and place it in there. And then where it says instance, that's what I want, hit OK. Since that's an instance, I can make changes back in the material editor to that material, and it'll change it on the model. So when I go to render, it's actually going to render out the same model with the same lighting, but it's going to replace all the materials with that override material. So I'm going to go into my environment settings. Since I have the MR physical sky on and my photographic exposure control is set to that outdoor daylighting preset, all my lighting is going to work for my daylight system. I'm going to go under indirect illumination. I'm going to keep final gather on with a draft setting and a diffuse bounces of 2 and hit render. So all my settings that we had used in previous videos are the same. The only difference now is I have that override material on there. Still going to get the sky color, and since we're using that MR physical sky, we're actually going to get different color sky depending on what time of day it is. So when I do this light study, it's going to go from morning sky to the afternoon sky to the night sky. So it's actually going to go completely dark at the end of the animation. But that override material just gives it a nice contrast to the shadows. So I'm done with the material settings. Now I'm going to animate the daylight system. So I click on the daylight system and go into the motion panel over, it's the 4th tab on the create panel, or on the control panel I should say. And it's the hours, the time that I'm going to change over time here and animate. So on my slider here on the bottom, notice it says 0/100. That's frame 0 of my animation. I only have 100 frames here by default. I'm going to click on the time configuration button in the lower right corner of your screen there. And on the end time, I'm going to create 300 frames now. So end time I change to 300 and then hit OK. That gives me 300 frames to work with. Now we're using the NTSC standard, National Television Standard. So we're going to be 30 frames per second in our animations. This is going to be about a 10-second animation. So every 30 frames is 1 second of actual animation time. So the start of my animation, I'm going to change the hours here to 06, so it's 6 a.m. And my time slider, where it says 0/300 down there, I had to make sure that's at 0. So I'm going to render that at 6 a.m. to see what the render looks like. So again, my override material is on there. It's 6 a.m., so it's the morning sun. It's very dark. Has that orange color to it. Notice the sun is actually out there. That's part of that MR physical sky parameter that I had set under the environment setting. So that MR physical sky does just that. It creates the sun there. So you just have to make sure your daylight system is actually in the view that you're rendering. And then that sun is actually going to rise up out of the scene when we animate it. So I'm going to start at 6 a.m. Now I'm going to turn auto key on, button on the bottom here. Now Max is going to memorize any movements that I make here over time. So I'm going to take my time slider here and scrub it to frame 300. This is going to be the end of my animation. And at the end, they want to make it late at night, so I'm going to do 20 hours, so it's 8 p.m. So I can still get a preview in that perspective view. It's probably going to render pretty dark though. But notice those little keyframes that appeared there. I'm going to turn auto key off. If I move that slider back and forth, I can see now that my daylight system is animated over time and the shadows are changing. So I've just created my light study there all that's really left is to render this out now. And you can see the changes in shadows. And I'm just going to turn play on. It's kind of like VCR controls, lower right corner. I just clicked on play, and whatever view you're in, you can see over time how that's changing. So moving that time scrubber around allows you to look at different frames of time. So I'm going to go about frame 150, about in the middle of the animation. So we looked at the morning sun before. Now we're in the afternoon, so the sky has changed to that bright blue. Sun's no longer in the view. So over time in our animation here, that sky color is going to change to give it a nice realistic look. I always do some test renders in between my beginning and end of the animation just to make sure it looks good. And as I get closer to the end here, my perspective view is pretty dark there, the preview. When I go to render, pretty late at night, so it's going to be extremely dark. So you get to the point at the end of this animation, it's going to be just really complete darkness. You can just barely see the building there. And in our next video, we're going to actually add some light inside the building, so you can actually have some lights that turn on in the interior of the building. So that's something we're going to end up adding. But for now, we're just going to keep it this way. Now to render out this animation file, that's all created, ready to go. We just want to render it now. If I go into my graphic editor and track view, the curve editor, and this is again something we're going to use in future videos, track editor shows the curves of whatever object is selected. So right now solar time is selected. So for that daylight system, that's just the change in value from frame 0 up to frame 300. Other settings right now don't have any curves because I didn't change any of the other settings basically. As we work through other objects, we'll be working with interior lights, we'll be making some changes in here. So right now for this daylight system, the solar time is the only curve that's being shown in there. So it's showing my keyframes. On the left side, it's showing what time of day it is from 6 a.m. up to 8 p.m. It's just a straight linear change. This relationship could be changed if we wanted to directly from the curve editor. So this is just a way to change your keyframes. And we're going to revisit that in future videos. That was just to introduce to you the curve editor. And now to render out this animation, I'm going to just click on F10 or click on the icon in the upper right there. Active time segment, so I'm under my common tab here. My active time segment, I'm going 0 to 300. The pixel width and height, I'm going to change to 320 by 240 to make it a smaller video just so it'll render faster. And then I'm just left click and panning up to get to my render output setting here. So under render output, I'm hitting files, and you just want to navigate out to where you want to save the file. So I'm just going to give it a name, light study. File type, we'll go for an AVI. That way Windows Media Player can play it. You can also do QuickTime movies. So AVI, you're just going to click on Save. So all 300 frames now are going to be rendered out as an animation file. Video compressor, we'll use Cinepack. You can see all the other listings that are in here. You have to compress the video, otherwise it just won't run smoothly. You'll be dropping frames if you don't render it. So you have to render it with a compressor. Check my viewport. It's definitely the perspective view down here. And I'm going to click on render. So now every one of those frames has to be rendered. So it's going to start at frame 0 and just render them out. So you just let Max render this video out. So at the end of the 300 frames, animation will be complete. And then you would just open up this AVI file that we're creating here in Windows Media Player and play the animation. So this is going to keep going. Notice here it's telling me I have an hour under time remaining. So it gives you an idea of how long it'll take to render. That's actually pretty fast. Using that override material, turning on or turning off some of the other settings could make it go faster, but really that override material is what's making it go pretty quick now. If you have a large pixel width and height, it can take a long time to render. So just let that render out, and then you can open up that AVI file and test it out yourself there.